thank you very much indeed. Lucy, Stephen, we're in your hands, and thank you for joining us.
Super. Thank you very much indeed. What a lovely collect to start the evening with. Compassion for those in need. And it's just very, very apparent to anybody who has anything to do with children and young people at the moment that there is huge need. And a huge need for compassion from God's church for that particular people group, with the whole trauma that that age group has gone through over COVID and all the after effects of that. We're really seeing the after effects. So wonderful that you're here tonight, showing your concern for children and young people and their families and their schools, and it's really great to be with you. I'm Lucy, and I head up the Growing Faith Foundation. We'll explain what that's all about as we go along. And Stephen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, evening everybody, lovely to be with you all. So I'm Stephen Beamond. I'm the Growing Faith Programs lead, so anything to do with training and development as it emerges through the work of Growing Faith is my responsibility. So great pleasure to work with Lucy and the rest of the team, and yeah, wonderful to be with you tonight and share hopefully some great ideas and some thinking around this idea of growing faith.
Super. We're going to sort of box and cox as we go along tonight between us, and Stephen will explain later on what the plan for the evening is, so that you know where we're going. But just to kick off, if you could open the first slide, Stephen. I wonder what you see in this picture. Perhaps you'd like to have a look at it for a little while, check out the border, check out the figures, the background, the details of it. If you'd like to, if you're sort of not laden down as I am with dumplings for lunch for dinner, you might want to pop in the chat something that you see or something that you notice in that picture, or even perhaps which story you think it might be trying to illustrate. But feel free just to look, because it is evening and everyone is probably tired after a long day. There we go. So I see a flowery border and some sort of city in the background, and in the center there's a tiled floor perhaps, and a chalkboard and a waste paper bin that's pretty full. Religion is an illusion written on the board. That's it, Tim. Yeah. There's a light coming through, shining on the figure in the center with the red jacket on and sneakers. And he's surrounded by very venerable gentlemen with strange expressions on their faces. And then just to the right, I don't know if you can see there, but just to the right, there are a couple of other figures just coming in. I expect by now you'll have remembered which story it is. If you could flick on, Stephen. It's the very, very familiar one of Luke 2, where it is one of the few stories that we have of Jesus's childhood. And if you remember, it's the one where the family have gone up with the whole village up to the big city for the festival of the Passover. And they have their Passover, great time all together, and then they're on the way back, and Mary and Joseph have gone along the road for a whole day before they realize that Jesus isn't actually with them. It's that kind of safeguarding nightmare moment. They ask around, not to be seen, so they go back to Jerusalem, and look what it says. They searched for him. After 3 days they found him. After 3 days. Imagine what that must have been like. Well, perhaps don't imagine, just horrendous. 3 days and 3 nights, let's face it. So parents' worst nightmare, but they find him, and they find him in the temple, and there he is sitting with these teachers of the law, these experts, these brilliant minds, these experts in the law, and they are amazed at his questions and his answers. And after a bit of a kind of moment, Jesus goes back and look at the end. Look at the end of this passage of Luke. That final paragraph down at the bottom of the page. Then Jesus went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and people. And particularly that last line of Jesus growing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and people. Think about that in terms of the children that you're in contact with, the young people who are on your horizons, in your deanery, in your church, in the schools in your area, walking down the street, hanging around at bus stops, playing in the park. Think about them and the people that they are growing into, the people they are now and the ones they're growing into, and look at the way that Jesus becomes the person that God wants him to be, the life in all its fullness. He grows in wisdom, so his mind and his heart are, as full and rich as they can be. He grows in stature, so physically he's given all that he needs to be a physically whole human being, and in favor with God. So he's got this wonderful relationship with God and people. So the relationship isn't just one way, it's out to all the people that he comes into contact with. And if you could flick on, Stephen, as we're thinking about our deaneries and about our parishes, about our dioceses, I love this story because it's like an onion. It's like lots and lots of layers of onion that kind of support the child Jesus to become the person that God needs him to be. And I know I'm muddling up all well, Jesus is God as well. I know all that. But as a child, Jesus grows up to be the best that he can possibly be. Look at all those different communities that Jesus is part of. It's safe and intergenerational. So actually Mary and Joseph aren't fussed when he hasn't been with them for a day, or they haven't seen him for a day. They've got the village looking after him, loads of uncles and aunts and cousins and second cousins. Family is key. So whatever family means, all the different combinations of people that make up a family, family is a key part of that child's upbringing. It's a community that's got rhythms and seasons. They go up for the festivals all together as a community. It's a community with space for listening, questioning, answering. So there in the temple, Jesus isn't just sitting listening, and he's not just talking at people. It's space for conversation, for dialogue, for listening to the child as well as informing the child. It's got different interlinking structures working together, local and national. That child's spirituality is already flourishing. Jesus's spirituality is alive and kicking, and those teachers recognize that. Though from the picture, I don't think you would notice that because they look very disapproving. Adults learning with and from a child, really challenging. And a community, as I said before, where a child can flourish physically, cognitively, relationally, to become the adult capable of fulfilling their calling. And that's what we want for the children in our deaneries, in our parishes, in our schools, everywhere, in our families. We want people to become the best that they can be, with a vibrant spirituality that reaches out and connects with God, connects with the people around them. And the church and the deanery and the diocese and the national church and the global church are all sorts of layers of the onion today for the children that we have in our care, where we're trying to help them grow using these different communities to help them be the people that they're meant to be. So Stephen, tell us about what the community is in the national church that is helping today.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to build on that, and before we just dive into what the shape of tonight's session will look like, it's just a great time for people who are bothered about children and young people, and those who are wanting to put them on the radar and value and nurture them as their right and proper place within the family of God. You may be better versed in these bold outcomes and vision of the national church than I am, perhaps. But it's encouraging to see that the younger and more diverse picture of the church of the future is clearly on the agenda. What's so encouraging is it's not just Lucy and myself and our small team that is banging this drum, but rather the whole thinking of the national church is in this direction, with it being an agenda item even on each Archbishop's Council meeting, I believe. Whether you're receiving direction or instruction from or working with ministry and development or vision and strategy, or with ourselves in the education office with Growing Faith, the idea of the church becoming more younger and more diverse is high on the radar for everybody. So it's a great time to be part of this conversation, knowing that there is a national drive and an awakening to realize that our church needs to move in this direction. And so tonight's session, if the slides are working, there we go, is threefold. First of all, we want to give you a clear understanding of exactly what Growing Faith is. And there'll be lots of activities and some thinking behind that, and hopefully some time to break out and discuss what's going on in your area, in your deaneries, that has a Growing Faith field currently. Chance to reflect on our own practices and have some discussion, particularly around, as we'll discover, those interlinking spheres of home, church and school. And as always is so beneficial, probably not always just listening to the speaker, but being able to engage with others and hear about the stories, hear about some of those challenges, bring some ideation and creation together as we engage with others. So first and foremostly, Lucy, probably a good idea to answer this question. What on earth are we talking about tonight?
What is Growing Faith? Well, Growing Faith, oh gosh, Growing Faith has been around for a few years now. It would be lovely if we could see you all, which we can't. It would be really nice to know if it's actually part of your understanding of what's happening in the church at the moment, whether you've heard of it as a lens, as a concept, or whether this is brand new. But we can't see you, so alas, we can't even get you to wave a hand. But it started roughly 2018, and it came from some research which we'll explain in a moment, which we'll touch on in a moment, which says that children's spirituality stands the best chance of flourishing when home and church and school work together. And so the Growing Faith Foundation was formed with a rather radical aim. It's to change the culture of the Church of England, which we all love as a thing that gets us out of bed in the morning. It's trying to change the culture of the Church of England so that everybody instinctively puts children and young people at the heart of all that we do as a church. And I'm just going to say that again, because it's pretty large and pretty challenging. The Growing Faith Foundation exists to change the culture of the Church of England so that everybody instinctively puts children and young people at the centre of all we do as a church. This isn't ousting God from the center of all that we do as a church. Don't get us wrong. Christ stays right there at the center. It isn't about saying we're going to forget all the older people because they don't matter anymore. The only group that matters is young people. It's not about that. That's just coming up with excuses. This says that the church has a real issue, that we are getting older, and we are not being a church for everybody in our country. There are people groups who miss out on being able to worship God in community because they don't find a place in their local church. And the research from the Fuller Institute over in the States says very clearly that where churches actually make a difference, where they do grow younger, one thing that all the churches who are growing younger have in common is that they are very intentional about being there for children and young people, about putting children and young people first. It just doesn't happen on its own. I think in my worst moments, I think, gosh, we adults are usually so selfish that actually we quite like church as it is, thank you, that suits us fine, and never mind everybody else, it'll just suit us. And unless we actually deliberately say we're going to put children and young people at the centre, it's not going to happen. So there we are, changing the culture, which is, let's face it, what we're all about. We're about being transformed people, and churches, homes and schools working together. Why do we need a change of culture? Well, we won't dwell on this, but I suspect all of us, myself included, can look at our churches and say, the children and families, the young people that we had even pre-pandemic, the numbers are going down and down and down. And none of us are alone in that. It's a national problem. The families, many of the families who left during the pandemic simply haven't come back. And we are stuck with this problem that the numbers are just going down. However, although the numbers have decreased by something like 40% in churches, look how many children attend Church of England schools Monday to Friday every week. About a million children in Church of England schools. And so the growing faith thinking says, instead of sitting mourning the lack of children in our churches, why don't we do what Jesus always did and go out to where people are and meet them there? In this case, if we want to meet children and young people, why don't we go and meet them in the schools and serve and make space for worship and make space for learning about God and encounter with God, make space there. So this is about churches, homes and schools working together. One of the things that is really important in this, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, is it's very easy to talk about children and young people a lot and not actually listen to them. Those teachers in the temple, they sat and listened to Jesus as well as talking to him. And while we couldn't bring children on tonight, even though there's a baby crying in the other bedroom as I speak, we can't bring children on tonight to speak to you, but we have created a few videos, and we'll just show a couple of minutes of this just to illustrate the fact, really, just to remind ourselves of the vibrancy of children's spiritual life. So here's a couple of minutes from this video.
I think I feel closest to God in school because that's when I can actually pray and I know that other people are around me doing the same thing.
In school when we do our collective worship, because I feel so close to people because everyone's praying and just listening. To like when Mr. Chadwick says amen at the end. At school, because I don't know, like I haven't ever like gone to church or anything, and school's like the closest place where I feel God. Everywhere, because God is always watching to make sure you're doing the right thing. But if you're doing something wrong, you'll have to have the consequences to it.
I think like, because in my religion there's statues of God, so whenever I just see a statue of God, I just bow and I think that's where I feel closest to God, because there's a room and that's where we go to pray. So that's where I feel closest to God. There's a room, I don't know what to call it, but yeah.
Everywhere, because it's like, to me it's everywhere, because it's like the thought that counts, that God is always watching.
In my experience, it doesn't really correspond to a certain time or place. It usually just happens suddenly, like flipping a switch. It's not always obvious that there's a connection. Sometimes I have to think about it afterwards to really process the moment. Though I wouldn't say that I frequently feel a connection with God, I believe that's because He understands me and the way that I think. For me, it's not about where or when or even how often there's a connection, but how powerful the moment is. The moments that I will never forget, and the moments where He was undeniably there.
Thank you. Stephen, could we just come out of the PowerPoint for a moment so we can see everybody? Brilliant. Would anyone like to unmute and just say something that struck you from what any of the young people said?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm Vivek. Yeah, I was quite intrigued with what they said, but the one that appeals to me most is when he says there wasn't any particular point where it is, because he knows that God is always with them wherever they are. So, and it doesn't happen at a strategic point or so. So he's always listening. I thought that's really good to hear that coming from a child. Yes.
Super. Thank you, Babette.
I thought it was interesting that one or two of them said they felt closest to God at school.
When I heard that, I was trying to think, did I feel close to God at school when I was at primary school? I certainly didn't at secondary school. I'm trying to remember if I did at primary, and I don't think I did. But you're right, several of them mentioned it, didn't they?
I wonder if the feeling closer to God at school is where there isn't the fellowship at their church where they actually are with their friends, etc. But at school, they're comfortable in the surroundings and therefore feel quite at ease, saying, well, that's where I feel closest to God.
I was in a school yesterday, lucky enough to visit a school in Manchester Diocese, and we were chatting to some of the year sixes. So they were 10, a couple were 10 years old. And one of them went to church and described what they did in their church. And it was quite a big Anglo-Catholic church. They had a Sunday school, and he talked about the loudness of the music, which I thought was guitars and drums. It turned out to be the organ, was a very loud organ in a very echoey church. The other lassie didn't go to church. She didn't belong to a church. And later on in the conversation, she started talking about how she prays and why she loves praying. And she said, oh, it's just great. And her hands came into play. She said, because it's like you talk to God and you're bringing all these thoughts and your feelings to him, and you like lay them out before him, and then they shoot up to heaven. And this lass did not go to church. Her spirituality was being nurtured certainly by school, maybe by her home as well. But certainly school was where she felt close to God as well.
Did I ask whether all the children interviewed are Christian?
No, they weren't. No, some of them were from other faiths, like the lassie who talked about in her religion there's lots of statues.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
because I think that's particularly interesting that that the research was focusing on God as opposed to any particular way of approaching God.
Mm-hmm. Well, part of the joy of working in a school is that, you know, sometimes especially Church of England schools are particularly diverse in terms of the people who belong to them. And a lot of parents love the fact that Church of England schools take faith seriously. Yeah.
That's an extremely valuable point, I think, particularly in the area of London where I live, where we're about 50% other faiths.
I think there's a general trend actually. People of other faiths look to Church of England schools because they have a belief system, because they have the values and the morals, whereas they may not consider themselves to be Christians, but what they respect about Church of England school is that whole ethos which is there. It's interesting, really.
Yeah. Great. Let's hand back to Stephen. Stephen, take over again.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, and if you're interested in watching that whole video, there's a link in the chat which you can avail yourself of in your own time. But Lucy mentioned that the work that we're doing, rather reassuringly, is underpinned by some fantastic research that came out of the National Institute for Christian Education Research, based in Canterbury, in 2020, which was really looking at the interplay between church, home and school, and particularly where it is that children's and young people's faith has the most likely chance to flourish. Now, they have produced some really helpful videos and resources. And I'm going to again put another link in the chat, so I won't bore you with going through the details of the 120-page report that came out of it, but just a few highlights to bring to your attention. The research, if you do go through the research, it splits it into 4 key elements. The first one is that which they entitle Faith Talk, the idea that, surprise, surprise, children are able to initiate conversations about faith. Lucy just shared that amazing example of a child that doesn't even go to church, but their spirituality is longing to be expressed in some way, and there is a connection there. And they found that that children enjoy wrestling with some of those bigger questions about life and death and creation. But it did also highlight that quite often parents maybe feel a little bit out of their depth very quickly. I know at bedtime tonight we had a question about Jesus being tempted in the desert, and a question about the devil, and so we had a brief conversation, but we were like, oh, we need to dig into this a little bit more at another time when we're not rushing for bedtime and getting on a Zoom call at 7 tonight. But children are big initiators and want to have that space to be able to wonder and think and work out their understanding around some of these bigger questions. I'm going to jump around in these bullet points, so do excuse me doing that. But the sense of belonging as well is also absolutely crucial. And the research found that where there is a close connection between church and school, then this really positively impacted that sense of belonging within a family that is exploring spirituality and engagement with a God of love through the person of Jesus Christ. It also found that on the negative side, that where that relationship was fragmented or a little bit difficult, that it had a direct negative impact on that sense of belonging. They also found that children and young people love reflective practices. They like time for quiet. And if you watch the rest of that video, one thing that stood out to me when I watched those children's reflections was that the amount of children who like quiet space, who like time away from others, perhaps, for stillness and quiet. And step foot in any primary school across this country, and you might sense something a bit different. You know, it's busy, it's fun, it's loud at times, it's engaging, it's bright, it's energetic. But also those spaces that schools create for stillness and quiet, as we started our evening in tonight, was found to be really valuable places for children and young people to engage with God and thinking a bit more deeply about some of those bigger questions. And finally, having routines and rituals, those things that are kind of the rhythms of faith communities, was something that children enjoy and find as an expected experience for somebody that is exploring faith. It also gave parents the confidence as they went through the rhythms of the year, something we'll pick up later in another piece of research, that parents almost had a bit more confidence to back up what the school was sharing, and so on and so forth. But the real underlying message through all of this research is that when church and home and school intentionally work together and champion each other and bring their brilliant aspects that all of those areas bring, then the chance for faith to flourish in young people is benefited and has a better chance of thriving. Now, I'm not going to break out for this question, but it is a question for you to reflect on, as I'm sure you are as I'm speaking, is to think about where do you see these practices happening well in your deanery? And I wonder whether there is anything else that you would add to this short list. Trevor Coolin, who endorses this publication, says that nexus matters, connection matters. It is deeply unhelpful when the connections between home, church, and school are ignored. So that's some of the big picture stuff around, you know, what is growing faith? Where's it come from? What's underpinning it? What's some of the theology behind it? But we thought it'd just be helpful to share practically how that's working through our streams of work. So Lucy, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. So again, we'll box and cox on this, but we've talked about church, home, and school working together. We've talked about the way that the Growing Faith Foundation has been set up at the very heart of the Church of England, one of its sort of foundation stones to support parishes and dioceses and deaneries and so on. With the idea of changing the culture so children are at the center of everything. And obviously we had to kind of say, okay, we're going to change the culture. How are we going to do that? I have to say the first thing that I did when I took this job a year and a half ago, the first thing I did was say, this isn't going to happen on its own. This isn't going to happen with clever project plans. This isn't going to happen with me working 24/7. It's just, no, that's not going to happen. This is going to happen through prayer, if nothing else. So the first thing we did was to set up a prayer support team, which we'll mention later on. You can sign up for it and encourage others to sign up for it, because this is God's work. But within that, the directions that we're working in are around networks, programs, research, hubs, and sharing the story with another element called flourish, which we'll explain. So we just thought it would be helpful for you to know the strands of the work, and we'll just chat about each one in case there's stuff that is useful for you or for people in your deaneries to know about. So one thing which is so important is connecting people. And quite often in this world of children and youth ministry, we end up working in silos. We don't know what other people are doing. We don't know the good practice from elsewhere. We feel isolated because we're the only person in our area who is a children or youth minister, or perhaps we're the only vicar in the area who has a heart for young people. Perhaps we're the only lay leader who has. So our colleague Hannah, whose email is on this slide at the bottom there, she's our networks lead. And her brief is to set up networks of people across the country who will come together, usually online, in fact, I think invariably online, with a shared aim and a shared interest that's something to do with that nexus of church, home and school, to help each other learn better, to build up relationships, to support each other, and to inform each other about that area of ministry. So we've put a few on that slide there. There's a very vibrant chaplains network that's recently started up. Much to Hannah's kind of surprise, she invited people to sign up thinking that we'd get sort of 20 or 30 school chaplains, and when it got to 120 school chaplains who wanted to get together online to chat, she had to close the list. So very popular one. Toddler group leaders, and again talking to someone from Sutherland Notts Diocese today. We were talking about the networks. I was saying, well, you know, is it working for you? We don't want to usurp what dioceses can do well and can do better than national at a diocesan level. And she said, do you know, that's something like the toddler group leaders I would love to do in my diocese. I do not have the capacity. I don't have the time. So it's absolutely brilliant that I can point people towards the Growing Faith Network for that. Parachurch organisations, vital in our joint ministry for children and young people. They bring so much expertise. There's one about the school church connection, serving your local school, and one for people who are interested in hearing the voice of children and young people. That's that CYP, children and young people. So how do we really listen? How do we really respond to what children and young people are saying to us? And that's already had some really exciting results as people have come together, thought about the challenge, and then gone away and put it into practice in their own diocese. Leicester is a case in point. Fantastic Matt in Leicester has revitalised the whole network of listening to groups of children and young people in schools and in churches through the network that Hannah set up. So lots of exciting stuff going on. If you're interested in that, just drop Hannah an email and she will gladly share with you all the different networks that there are. So Stephen, tell us about programmes, because that's dear to your heart.
Yeah, so we recognise that for this to really gain momentum, we need to train people. We need people to really buy into what Growing Faith is about and be thinking about how they impact their world, their context, their deanery, their parish, their church. And so it's my role to look after programmes within Growing Faith. And we've launched the Growing Faith Strategic Leaders Programme as our first programme. It is up and running with its first and second cohort already underway. And what's been just such a joy with bringing this programme together and building some interest across the country is the appetite there is for professional development in this area. So we've attracted a real unique mix of people, such as we've got church leaders, we've got head teachers and chaplains, charity leaders, those who are diocesan advisors, and just about everybody in between as well. People who are just, sorry, the slides are flying up, just keen to learn and grow alongside with others, but with a real clear focus of this not just being a piece of professional development that ticks a box and goes on a CV, but rather is having a transformative impact on children and young people. And I've just had the joy this last couple of weeks to have one-to-one sessions with all of the participants on the second cohort, and to hear the stories of growth, not just internally of how how people are becoming a leader and realizing their influence, but also on their context, on their environments. Like I said, in loads of various and creative ways. So we've joked that we have this tiny team of four of us, well, nearly 5 of us in Growing Faith, but actually we have representatives all over the country, hundreds of people who are flying the flag, wanting to get involved for all it means to be bringing children and young people at the heart of that nexus. Now, all these slides will be shared. In fact, Tug already has a copy of these slides. So I'm sure they'll be circulated afterwards, but there's loads of positive comments coming through from the different participants who are taking part. Here's a few of them here, really commenting on how it's shaping themselves, allowing them that space to have that deeper reflection about why they do what they do, and how that impacts every conversation they have, every strategy meeting they have, how they plan with others. And so it's just a joy to be able to lead and see this come together. So Lucy, tell us a bit more about research.
I will. I'm just looking at Anne's very interesting question in the chat, which I will ponder over over the break, which is coming up in just a few minutes. Don't let us forget that one, Anne. Thank you very much for that important point. So another strand of what we're trying to do is build the community of researchers in this area, so that we have some really good cutting edge information and data, qualitative and quantitative, to build on as we shape the direction of Growing Faith going forwards. And so we've got 12 or 13 research projects which we've sponsored and which we take an interest in and support. And the idea is that we raise the profile in the academic world of this practical form of theology and action research in the world of children and youth, but also that we inform ourselves and we give each other confidence. So those are the titles of some of the research projects that we've got going at the moment. And related to that, Stephen, if you move on to the next slide, because it's different, but it's also about finding out more. Our colleague Cheryl heads up the hubs, and these are centres of experimentation, which we've got scattered all over the country. You can see the blue markers on the map there. The first 12 are up and running. We've got another 6 in the pipeline coming on board, and there'll be a chance for some more people to apply to be hubs in 2024. And these are why no hubs in the Midlands? Simply because either nobody in the Midlands applied, or the ones that were elsewhere were thought to be better. But we have got we've got Nottingham and Derby, Glossop, and Leicester, which are pretty Midlands-ish. So we're trying to work with them to just take a few risks around children and youth work in a non-safeguarding sense, obviously, but to try and see what happens if you really take Growing Faith seriously. Can it work in a different way on the ground? So I won't list them all out, but I just thought it'd be interesting for you to see in phase 5 in January next year. As you'll see, the second one down in St Albans Diocese is actually a deanery that's got together and said, we want to be a hub and think about how this works between rural churches. So that'll be an exciting one to keep an eye on. And very briefly, just to say that this is coming. There's the opportunity over the next few years to for churches and schools to work together really closely, and to put new worshipping communities in schools. Now, their working name is Flourish, because we want young people to flourish in their churches. And there you've got the the principles that this is working on. This isn't a set pattern. It's not a cookie cutter. This is how it's going to work. We're pioneering this. We don't know how it's going to be. There are loads of questions to answer, but there are about 10 dioceses who have put themselves forward to pilot this, and there'll be a lot of energy and resource and interest and support given to setting up new worshipping communities or churches, congregations in schools that are very closely linked with their local church. But it's something to look out for in the next few years. It will be a new way of being part of the parish church in in each parish, just not necessarily in the church building. And Stephen just finishes off quickly with
just before break. So we're a fairly newish team in this form, just over a year old, and we are busy trying to make a noise and share stories and put children and young people on the radar of everyone. So there's a couple of things that you may want to avail yourself of some of the videos that we've been making. You've had a snippet of one there, and we are releasing a new podcast every month as well. So like I said, you'll get all these slides, all of these links are clickable, so don't worry about scribbling down awkward URLs, but they are there to listen to and enjoy as well. So I suggest we take, that was a lot of information, so I think we'll need a short break away from the screen, and we will then move on with a bit more reflective practice around, well, where are we seeing growing faith at work within your context and within your reach. So if I could ask, if this is all right, Tug, to come back for 25 past. That would be fantastic. Do bring a drink, biscuit with you, and munch along as we go into the next part of this evening. Thanks so much. Great, we are at 26 minutes past, so we'll make a start. Thanks for being prompt in coming back. I know it's a quick break, but we just want to make the most of this time, and just always good to stretch the legs and get a break from the screen. So we're now going to dive into a bit of reflection around where we see this at work in our world. So we're going to get you busy in just a moment, but if you haven't gathered so far, this is our logo. It represents those three spheres of church, home and school overlapping and working together. And so what we're going to ask you to do in just a moment is to go on to a tool called Jamboard, which you may well have used before. If you haven't, there's a little video here on how to use it that might work, might not work, it's not working. There's a link coming in your chat, and what we'd like you to do is to click on it. And what you can do is, once you've clicked on it, on the left-hand side, there is a little icon that looks like a post-it note. If you click on that, you can write in there an idea that you might be doing, or you might have seen work in one of those spheres or an overlapping sphere. So for example, if you perhaps go to a school to lead collective worship now and again, then that would go in that sphere between church and school, in that section between church and school. If you run a messy church, for example, that would just go in that sphere of church. If you create resources that parents are able to use to help disciple their children at home, that would go in the home category. And so it'd be just really interesting to see which things are coming to mind really easily, and how we populate this. Once you've pressed enter on that sticky note, you can change it, resize it, move it to where you would like it to be. And just a note of caution is that you are able to delete other people. So just think before you click and think before you delete. But we'll give you a few minutes to do that before we go into our first breakout, which will be reflecting on what we notice. Hey, great, starting to get a few ideas coming in. Looks like everybody's figured out how to use the tool. Do shout if you're having any bother, and I'm more than happy to walk you through that. Got 11 people getting involved at the moment. If you're just joining us after break, there's a link in the chat that you can click on, and we're using a tool called Jamboard just to populate these spheres with the work of our mission and ministry that might land in any of these spheres. It may well come in overlapping areas, which is absolutely fine. It might come into that sweet spot in the middle that engages church, home and school. And you can add your own comments by just, like I say, click on the link. Then on the left-hand side, there's a sticky note looking icon. Click on that, and then you can add to your heart's content.
I'm not able to see that, Stephen. I'm bad at this. Can you hear me, Stephen?
Yeah, what are you struggling with there, Vivette?
Just even to get to the link, I find myself where I clicked on the link, and so
Yeah.
I can see the circles and people putting things on, or in order to add anything if I want to.
Okay. Okay. Well, if you're able to watch along, and maybe we come to you first, Vivette, for what you notice about where those post-its are landing, where they're becoming populated, where there's gaps. Any things that you might notice as we go along. And I notice Anne Lee, apologies, thanks for testing that on a Mac. I haven't tried this before, so thanks for feeding that back. I'll think of another way for next time. And so I'll just give you a couple more seconds to do that, and then Tug, if you don't mind getting breakouts ready, and we'll hit go in just a moment.
Vivette, would you like me to do a post-it note for you if you tell me what to put on it?
Yes, you can, please.
Okay. What shall I print on it?
Firstly, I was thinking about the home. How do we get engaged in the home? Because I see that is very unpopular.
You got any ideas we can put on a post-it note?
For the post-it note, I would think parents' involvement.
Brilliant.
And also teachers and parents working together as a link.
Fantastic. So do keep going. Tug's going to kindly put us in breakouts about 4 or 5, and I'd like you to I'll share these questions to the breakouts in just a moment, but really simply, what is it that you notice? Perhaps like Vivette, you notice that the home is somewhat a little lighter than the other areas. And I want you to think about, for yourself, what are some of those strengths when we're thinking about these 3 spheres, and what are some of those areas that you would like to develop and put some energy and focus into? And then who is it that might help you? Who is it, which of those church leaders that you might engage with, or head teachers or senior leaders, or children and youth workers who you might be able to engage with to help strengthen one of those areas? So I'll send those questions out to breakout rooms, and also if I'm tech savvy enough, I will send a picture of what you've compiled here. So thank you. Tug or Martin, if you could send us in breakout rooms, that would be amazing. Thank you.
I think we're back. I think we're all back. So grand. It would be really good if we could just have a little bit of feedback from those breakout rooms. What was the most significant thing that was said in them? I wonder, Stephen, if we could lose the beautiful screen, and even more beautiful now. We have the faces, superb. So perhaps somebody from some of the breakout rooms would just like to share perhaps something startling or something challenging or something encouraging that was shared in your breakout room. Who would like to kick off?
Perhaps you raise a hand. Debbie.
Thanks, Debbie.
Yeah, I was talking about how we do interact with schools quite a lot. And actually, I'm looking at the screen, and my my colleague has got her thumbs up as well, because we work together. And I was saying how we actually go into 8 primary schools and a secondary school, and how we are really blessed with that interaction with the children in their setting. But I was also saying about how we have closed a church building down, and we've moved that congregation into a local faith secondary school. And although the idea sounds fantastic, what we've discovered is that the children who go to that school don't want to come to their school on a Sunday.
No.
And so there are things to be thought about on that, really, and about, you know, how that works for the children of that school. I know Lisa has got some links now, and we've got some year 7s who might be quite interested. But certainly when we first started, the older kids were just like, well, I'm not coming back there on a Sunday. We're there Monday to Friday. So those things do need to be thought about as well.
Debbie, yeah, the sort of, what's the word? I suppose the theology of place is really interesting. And one of the research projects that was done in Guildford Diocese was exploring children's experiences of God. And what they found, much to their surprise, was how important the church building is to many of the children. And it's, you know, they saw it as a very special place, a very sacred place, a very stilling place. And I think the researchers had completely underestimated the power of the building. But yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else like to wave a hand?
John.
Yes, John.
Yes, yes. I think one of the key things, I think, in terms of liaison or engagement with schools is the ability of the rector or the priest to, you know, engage with children at their level, and not preach to them. Okay.
Yeah, it is an art, and it's really interesting, isn't it? Is that, Linda, is that better? Is that any better with my microphone?
Sorry. Yeah. Yes, I can hear you fine. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Slightly, thank you. You could put it up as well. That'd be even better. Yeah. So great. Thank you. It seems to
Thank
be
you for
going
mentioning
in
it.
first. Thank
Super.
you.
It's something that, you know, part of this culture change that we are working for together is making sure that all our church leaders, the ordained leaders and the lay leaders, everyone has the right training and skills to deal with all sorts of ages of people. And really interestingly, a colleague of ours who's a director of education in a diocese has recently been through her ordination training. And so she spent 2 years training in one of the colleges, and she came out of it and just been ordained. And she said, I totted up how many hours I spent on training for working with children and young people during my training. And we had 1 hour. 1 hour. Carolyn's head goes into her hands. And it is an art. It's a skill. It's something that doesn't come easily to everybody. But at every level of the selection process for our leaders, at every level of discernment of vocations and of training, not just in theological colleges, but also in in curacies as well, and in continuing ministerial development. We need to make sure that children are instinctively at the centre of all that we do for all of that. Otherwise, we just default to the church is for adults and children can make do on the edges, if at all. So yeah, having people with the right skills is really important. And one thing we need to do as a church is to make sure that that people are given the chance to learn those skills if they've never been trained in it, which obviously we've not got there yet with our ordination training. Yes, and we've got.
Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah, there's a comment there from St Anne's. It seems to me that parents don't speak to their children, sharing Bible stories and so on. Isn't it interesting? We could talk all night. I would get very passionate about the fact that perhaps in the Church of England, I don't think we have ever had a history of parents sharing their faith effectively in homes. I think it's been something that we've all assumed that everybody else can do, every other parent can do, except us. And so we can't possibly say that we don't know how to share our faith with our own children, because what would everybody else think of us? But actually, we don't have a history of it. And while there are some organisations now really trying to make a difference, like Care for the Family or Parenting for Faith, they're really, really helping to change things. But as a denomination, we just haven't expected our parents to do anything other than send their children to a church school, send their children to Sunday school, and have somebody else do it to them. So I wonder what could be done in the deanery to support parents who might not know how to do it because it was never done for them.
Could you take a question from Janet?
Yeah. Lynn, Lucy, we've got Janet Binns. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, yeah, thanks. I really just wanted to make an observation regarding here in Burnham and Slough, where we're fortunate enough to have quite a number of church schools as well as non-church schools, and we're actually in demand as far as most of the schools want us to visit and connect and engage with them. And we do that in lots of different ways. So thinking about training for clergy and leaders, there's so many different materials out there that you can use. I mean, Open the Book is really good. It's, you know, they do provide training, but also it's really easy to pick up the stories and go in and engage with the children. And yeah, just to mention Message Church as well. There is, you know, all the material is there. You just really need to to convince people that they need to be part of it. Yeah, so that's kind of an observation from me.
Janet, thank you. Yes, wonderful stuff going on with organisations like Open the Book. Brilliant resources for the church and just well for schools, but for churches and schools working together. It is amazing. And someone had put in the chat, isn't it interesting how often it's the children teaching their parents about faith? Really interesting observation. Very true.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got about 10 minutes left, Lucy. And Stephen, so whether you want to carry on some more questions, we could do so, or whether there's more presentation you want to share with us. We're in your hands. You feel you'd like to use the last 10 minutes, really.
Well, if we could just put on the last couple of slides, just for information, and then finish off with any more questions that people may have. I'm also very conscious that Anne's question hasn't been properly addressed about the need for collaborative leadership in churches. And I suspect it's not just a question of some clergy not, what's the word, being a bit lone wolf leadership-ish. I'm sure that it applies to lay leaders as well. And I think this is something that we really need to learn, that we are in this together. We need team leadership. We need the body of Christ in action in our leadership of our churches, and the way that we work together needs to be a lot more collaborative, and perhaps that applies not just within an individual church but across a group of churches. Maybe it's something where a deanery is ideally placed for working collaboratively without people being precious about everything having to happen in one church. And I think there's some really interesting models going on where where a deanery has really looked at its churches and complemented each other, and not tried to have everything going on in one church, but have, say, a vibrant toddler ministry in one church and a vibrant young people's ministry in another church, and everybody working together to support each other. I don't know if that's happening in any of your deaneries, but it's certainly a model which in theory should work really well. In practice, I suspect human beings get in the way. Stephen, let's just pop up the last couple of slides there. We were going to talk about this lovely piece of research, but I don't think there's time for that now. But it will be on the PDF that will be sent out to you. These are just it was a lovely piece of research that went on with some very deep theology within it. And those 4 hooks that you can see on the screen, voices, rhythms, relationships, and purpose, are just 4 approaches that the group distilled out of their research for working with children and young people in a wholesome, safe, healthy, effective, developing way. We haven't time to go through that now, but if you're interested in research, do check out the Growing Faith research. Stephen's put the link into the chat there. Here on the screen, you'll see the contact details. The emails are very easy, just name.name@churchofengland.org, as you'll see. And if you've got your phone to hand, you can scan those QR codes either now or when you get the PDFs afterwards. We have a newsletter that comes out every month, roughly, and that just has the headlines of what's going on in the Growing Faith world. And we try to share stories of what's going on around the country, as well as what's going on in the team. So that's a really good way of just keeping in touch with what's happening, and sort of finishing up where we started with the prayer newsletter as well, which again Stephen's popped in the chat there. There's a link that just signs you up to a weekly prayer newsletter. No, it's not even a newsletter. It's just a reminder to pray for children and young people and for the work of the Growing Faith Foundation. And here we are at that lovely verse from Luke 2, which is what we're longing for children in our country, in our churches, in our deaneries, in our dioceses, in our schools, in homes, and in our churches. We want our country to become a place where children can grow in wisdom and in stature and in favour with God and people. So that's one of our prayers for Growing Faith, with children at the centre, church, home and school working together, and God bringing about real, deep down, lasting culture change, so that more and more people of all ages can come to know and love Jesus Christ. So thank you, Tug. If we could pass back to you, that would be great. And perhaps there may be more questions.
If you have got more questions, we've got a few moments, ladies and gentlemen. If you've got some more things you'd like to ask, either put in the chat or by putting your hand up. We will watch the screen very carefully. Lynn, is that you? Would you like to ask a question? Lynn, you are muted. Okay.
No, I'd just like to thank everybody for their contributions this evening, because I found it extremely useful, having moved out of Chelmsford and now into East Suffolk. It is extremely difficult to come to terms with rural parishes where, of course, we have very few children. And this whole idea of setting up churches whereby one does one thing and one does something else, I think is going to be extremely useful. And I want to take that one forward, because we work in benefices of 6 or 7 churches, and I think that's really useful. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Lynn. Joe, you want to say something, Joe Heaton?
Yeah, Lucy, what do you do when you haven't got a church school in your parish? In fact, we've only got one in our diocese. I'm on the Isle of Man, and all the other schools are negative towards faith. It's difficult to get into the schools. It's a closed door most of the time.
Really good question, Joe. Really good question. And sadly, that also applies to some church schools as well. That it's it can be, there can be hostilities from past histories, which means that the relationships have broken down. And I think, every situation is different, and I would hate to say this is the answer. Go and do this, and it will all work perfectly. Obviously, that doesn't apply, but one thing that has really struck me about people who have made this work is that they've, as a vicar or as a church leader, they've gone to their local school very humbly, and instead of saying, we want to come in and do assemblies at you and do RE for you and run your after school clubs and things, they've actually sat down with the head and they said, how can we as a church serve you as a school? What help do you need from us? How can we help you in what you're doing so brilliantly for the children and staff in your care? And sometimes that's made all the difference. It's been the start of building up lasting relationships, and from those relationships, God uses it in all sorts of ways. There was a very quick story which I love. There was one parish where the relationship between the church and the school had completely broken down, and a new vicar came into post and decided that, they really wanted to work with the school. So they went to the school and said, what can we do for you? The school, the head, rather rudely and rather sarcastically said, well, if you really want to help, you could send a tray of donuts into the staff room every week. And so thinking that they would do nothing about it. So the vicar went away and arranged every week, every Friday, for a tray of donuts to be sent into the staff room. And it took 6 weeks before the school was writing in their newsletters, what an amazing church we have in our village. What a great relationship we have with them. And it took 6 trays of donuts, that's all. So something about that humility that listens rather than assumes that I'm the expert. I know what I need to give you, but someone that just listens.
Great. No, thank you for that, Lucy.
Thank you.
Lucy, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is any particular that there's nothing else in the chat room, I don't think. But I want on your behalf to say to Lucy and to Stephen a huge thank you. You've led us a really interesting discussion tonight and raised lots of points. And it's been really helpful tonight. So thank you both very much for your time and all that you do in this work, but also spending your time with us this evening. So we're really very grateful on your behalf to say thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. It's lovely to see you all. Some of us returning as regular, coming to our briefings, and some just new. So it's lovely to have you as well. Before we go, let's just be still for a moment and say together the grace, if we may. We pray for the young people in our parish.
Jesus Christ, and the love of
God,
and the fellowship
of the Holy Spirit.
Be with us.